I praise you, Hashem, for being angry at me. Now you're in the same shot. This evening we're going to explore the smallest chapter in the book of Isaiah. Actually, this chapter competes with chapter 4 of Isaiah, both of them only 6 passages. However, Isaiah chapter 12, which we're going to journey through this evening, is unique in that most of you sitting here could probably recite at least half of this chapter by heart. It's extremely famous. How did Isaiah 12 become so famous? Well, it is a song. It's essentially the song of Mashiach. This chapter also makes up a significant pericope of the Havdalah service itself. The beginning, the opening of Havdalah, I should move something? What? I thought you went like this, and I go, this is the wrong, you came to the wrong lecture. So Isaiah chapter 12 follows what? And don't say Isaiah chapter 11. Isaiah chapter 11 is about what? We discussed it last time together. It's all Mashiach. It's the famous chapter about Mashiach where we actually hear about the Messiah himself. And we discussed that how did Isaiah chapter 11, the chapter, perhaps the most famous Messianic chapter in all of Tanakh. I mean, this is massive, what we're going through now. So we discussed that, in fact, we have 2 pictures of God's redemptive process of the Davidic kingdom. The Almighty, blessed be his holy name, made an oath to King David in a very strange chapter in 2 Samuel chapter 7. Why is it a strange chapter? Because it's a chapter in which a Navi made a mistake. There are chapters in Tanakh where Tanakh records an error that a prophet made when he was not speaking bin nevuah. Prophets were the greatest men and women that ever lived. When they spoke bin nevuah, when they spoke in prophecy, so every word, every letter is the word of Hashem. But sometimes a prophet is asked a question and he's not receiving nevuah, so he's answering based on his best understanding. And King David, of blessed memory, came to the prophet Nathan and said, there's no Beis HaMikdash. There's no place where, after all, the tabernacle had already was not there for a long time. It's time. Natan was a tzaddik. He was a very holy man. And according to his cheshbon, of course, who's better than David HaMelech? We know now David HaMelech is mentioned in Tanakh more frequently than any other person. So he said, of course. But when Nasan went home, HaKadosh Baruch Hu came to him right away and said, go back. It's a big mistake. David cannot build a Beis HaMikdash. For whatever reason, he can't build it. However, I make a promise that his son, Shlomo HaMelech, he will build it, and from the one son who will build the temple in my name, from him will come forth all the generations, and the Davidic dynasty can never be destroyed. This is really important for you to grasp, that the Davidic covenant, the promise that the Almighty, blessed be his holy name, made to King David, can never be undone. Unlike David's predecessor, there it was undone, David not. What happens if you have a wicked child? So it says, if there will be a great-grandson of David, if one of his children will sin, I'll punish him personally with the rod of men. But Malchus David, the Davidic dynasty, can never be destroyed. This was not a new idea. There was nothing novel about what was being conveyed in this encounter, this goes all the way back to the Torah itself, when Jacob, of blessed memory, was bestowing, we'll call it blessings, but it's really he's conveying the destiny of each of the tribes at the end of his life on his deathbed. The most elaborate, the most ecstatic blessings were reserved for Yehuda. And in Genesis 49, verse 10, explicitly we are told that ultimately the kingship will come from you. And once you receive that kingship, it can never be taken away. Yehuda demonstrates in the Torah that he's not perfect, but he was able to recoup. He was able to get it back. The Mashiach in Tanakh is not a person who never made a mistake. The key of these individuals is they are able to recognize their error and say, I sinned. And when you have a woman like Tamar, and you have a man like Yehuda, who in Genesis 38 could have taken very different directions in their lives, but at the very end they both did exactly the right thing. This is exactly the kind of person I can work with, and it's not complicated to figure out if you have a shidduch with Yehuda and Tamar, what kind of eniklach, what kind of grandchildren they would have. David HaMelech would be the one who the same prophet would confront using a juridical parable, and David HaMelech says, I sin before the Lord. That's the kind of person I can work with. So we have encountered in Isaiah chapter 7 and 8, we talked about a very wicked king. We discussed Achaz, and Achaz, Hashem Kaviyachol, in a manner of speaking, was stuck with him. He couldn't allow Achaz's kingship to be destroyed. Why? Because he was a great-grandson of David. Achaz is perhaps the worst Davidic king that ever lived. But God could not break the IOU note that he made with Achaz. So he was saved. How was he saved? If I ask most people, how did God rescue Achaz from Syria and Ephraim, the northern kingdom? Most people would not know how God rescued them. It's an unnotable text in 2 Kings of an assassination that most people would not even notice. And that's how but God did save him. Emerges a giant, his own son. Achaz was a very wicked man, but he had a son who was the greatest Davidic king that ever lived. His name was Chizkiyahu. Chizkiyahu emerges out of nowhere. That's very important. Chizkiyahu is kind of like an Abraham figure. We talked about that last time. Abraham, our father of blessed memory, did not come from a religious home. Avram Avinu's father was an idol worshiper. His whole families were idol worshipers. They were in the business of idol worship. Joshua chapter 24, verse 2. He mamish came out of nowhere, and he emerges as perhaps the greatest person that ever lived in human history. So great was he that in Isaiah chapter 41, verse 8, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says about Abraham, he's my friend. No one else is described as my friend. Abraham discovers not only that God is one, but he concludes from that encounter, from that discovery, that there is one God and no other. It therefore must define God's nature as rachamim, because therefore God has no needs. There's nothing you have that God needs. There's absolutely nothing you can provide the Almighty that he doesn't already possess, because he's omnipotent, he's all-powerful. And if that's the case, then God must be love and mercy. He must be all chesed, because he doesn't need you. And if that's the case, Im Kain, Avram Avinu would live his life on chesed, to emulate the God he discovered. The monotheism of Judaism is critically connected not to a mathematical issue of there's one and not two or not five. That's not what's important. The reason you have to give your life rather than worship more than the one true God is not because you are it's an error of math of how many gods there are, but the moment you deny the unique oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you deny his nature that he's chesed. So this is the marvel of the personality that we emerge from, stunning people in history who we can learn from. You know, I sometimes guide tours in Israel. I don't do it anymore that much, but when I do, I ask people after the tour, I ask them, tell me, of all the places you visited, what moved you the most? And very frequently people say, you know, when I went to Hebron, and I went to the tomb of the patriarchs and matriarchs, that touched me in a way that nothing else did. Why? Because you're Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, but Abraham is Magin Avram. Abraham, he's mamish out of nowhere. This is what Chizkiyahu was. Chizkiyahu was out of nowhere. Suddenly the greatest king that would ever live emerges, and that's why there's such an exclamation in Isaiah chapter 9 by the people saying, wow, a child was born to us, a son given to us. What kind of talk is that? Why is he called it? Because he mamish came out of absolutely nowhere. The Gemara says that Roy Hayu Chizkiah Melech Li Yois Melech HaMashiach, that Hezekiah was literally worthy to be the Messiah. Why wasn't he then the Messiah? Why didn't God designate him as Mashiach? Could anyone tell me? What does Chazal tell us?
He didn't sing Shira.
He'd say it louder, Tatala.
Sing Shira.
He didn't sing Shira. He didn't sing a song. This concept, this notion, as you can well imagine, has perplexed many people. What does that mean, he didn't sing a song? So the first thing I'm going to share with you, one thing, my holy brothers and sisters, listen very carefully. We're going a little high now. We're going a little high, so we're just going to go. We're going somewhere, okay? So we're going high, okay? So if Isaiah chapter 11, Kindlech, is about the Mashiach and what will happen in the Messianic age, and then Isaiah chapter 12, the passages that we are going to explore, we're going to drink tonight, is the Shira of Mashiach. Put it all together with me, because this is very high. And I think you now are picking it up. And I'm feeling goosebumps all over, and probably some of you as well. Why is Yeshayahu Hanavi supplying the Shira, the song of Mashiach? Put it together for me, Kindlech. Why? Because this is the song that Chizkiyahu should have sung. Got it? You see how it all really works together so beautifully? But we still have some pieces that we need to tie up together. And we're going to journey, we're going to go down this as you can see now, we're climbing the mountain. We're going very high. Question, Kindlech, you know I'm begging the question. And you're all sitting here listening to my voice, looking at me now and going, but why didn't he say Shira? Right? So this is a tough one. Why could Chizkiyahu not say Shira? And I'll make it harder for you later on when you're going to join me later on in the book of Isaiah. Hezekiah, we're going to discover, becomes terminally ill. And Isaiah warns him, put your life in order, you're going to die. He approaches him in the palace. Isaiah comes to Chizkiyahu and says, put your life in order, you're going to die. Why? You'll wait for... Hezekiah immediately engages in a tremendous prayer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And as Isaiah is leaving the palace, the whole superstructure, Hashem comes to Yeshayahu and says, there's a change of plans. I just got a prayer. Go back and tell him he has 15 more years to live. No, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, Yeshayahu turns around and goes back to Chizkiyahu, you have 15 more years to live. And Chizkiyahu explodes with Shira. So I'm making the question even tougher. It's not like Chizkiyahu didn't know how to sing Shira. It's not that was not one of the gears in his system. He had it. Why then, Kindlech, didn't Chizkiyahu, why would he be unable to sing Shira after the greatest miracle that the Almighty performed for the children of Israel since the Exodus? For a timeline, just know that Isaiah, the events that we are describing here occurred roughly 600 years after the Jewish people left Egypt and were given Torah. It's about a 600-year period. So what might have interfered with Hezekiah's ability to sing a song of praise to Hashem? What might have prevented him? What could have been the block? You can see this is a conundrum that people, if someone would like to...
His ego, he felt he was, I don't know.
Right, so we're dealing with the greatest person, the greatest Davidic king that ever lived. 2 Kings chapter 18, verse 5. So Hezekiah not only endured with Yeshayahu one of the greatest moments in history, with the Assyrian army, 185,000 soldiers were wiped out, but he also witnessed prior to that the destruction of the 10 northern tribes. That all happens during the lifetime of Isaiah, which means during the lifetime of Isaiah, it's the highs and the lows, right? So imagine Jerusalem is saved in the 14th year of Hezekiah's reign. But Hezekiah had seen the destruction of the northern kingdom. There are many, many Jews from the northern kingdom, from what's called the 10 lost tribes, who are not lost at all. And probably a couple of you in this room are from these tribes, because we know from Tanakh that actually many people from the north came south. It's not like they were all gone. Many of them said, we're going down. So a person who sees such trauma and the miracle, the trauma may interfere with, may prevent, may block a person from expressing such thanksgiving, because there's also so much trauma that went along with it. For Chizkiyahu, for Hezekiah, just to read the notes given to him that were written by Rav Shaka, who was the assistant of Sancheiriv. He was a very big Russia. Cursing God, it tore him to pieces. He was so broken from that. It could be that at that moment it's hard to see it. Sometimes in history it's difficult to see. At the end of the 19th century, especially in the western part of the Russian Empire, there was a tremendous amount of pogroms. The word pogrom really is a Russian word, which retroactively became to use about Jews who were attacked in different cities. But it's a Russian word. The Jews were expelled from city, killed, thrown, they had to run. We had such czars in Russia, like Alexander III, Yamach Shemai V'Zechra, is a very big anti-Semite who blamed his father's assassination on the Jews, and Jews had to run. Many of you saw the film Fiddler on the Roof. It's moving, and it's very sad, and it really isn't fictitious. It is in a sense. There was no Anatevka, but there were thousands of Anatevkas. There were thousands of such places where Jews had to run. And many Jews, when their city in the Ukraine, where war is going on now, that was part of what's called the Pale Settlement. It's that part of Eastern Europe that was under the Russian Empire. And suddenly the non-Jews came and they started burning down synagogues, and Jews fled after they'd been living in these areas for so many years. Some of them, when they fled, they came here to Eretz Yisrael. That's why there was so many people who came to the land of Israel. So many Jews who fled here in the late 19th century. They were running away from these things, and many of them threw away their tefillin on the way. They gave up their religion and belief in God, and they thought, well, we're just going to be a nationalistic movement, and that's perhaps the only way to deal with anti-Semitism. Other people fled to the United States. In 1880, there were 280,000 Jews living in America. By 1924, there were 4.2 million Jews in the United States. 4 million Jews came to America, and many of them threw away their God, their tefillin overboard. They wanted nothing to do with God. They didn't know it at the time, my brothers and sisters, they were running away from Eastern Europe, the westernmost part of the Russian Empire. Many of you are here alive because of that. Now we know that they were, without knowing it, they were escaping Hitler's ovens. Jews in the land of Israel were safe. It could have gone a different way if Rommel's tanks had not failed in North Africa. Anything could have gone and things would have been different. During World War II, there were Nazi flags flying in Jerusalem. But as it turns out, the weirdest thing was this was the safe haven for Jews. So Jews here, Jews in America, they fled, but it was these things. So at the moment when these things are taking place, people don't understand what happens we can now, in hindsight, not understand every event that's occurred to our nation, but so many of these events, that's what the term, b'domai chayi, you live, you survive by your blood. It seems to you, we say that at a bris, it comes from a passage in the book of Ezekiel, but in the bittere finster, in the bitter darkness, hope is born. From the ashes of the Holocaust, a nation could be born. These are not my words, but these are the words of Jeremiah chapter 30, verse 7. It's called Jacob's trouble. The worst event in history, Jeremiah lived during the destruction of the first temple. It's not like he didn't see anything bad. It's not like he was on a beach somewhere with a martini and his life was terrific. He lived through a nightmare. But he says there's going to be a time in the future that's going to be the worst sorrow for Klal Yisrael, the worst misery for the nation of Israel. There's nothing going to be like it, nothing. Umimeno yivoshea, but from it is going to come your deliverance. But many of us, in a time of stress, we can't see God. I just can't. And then during a time of stress, it's difficult to sing Shira. How did Isaiah make its way into the Havdalah? And strikingly, I want to just go a little higher. As it turns out, not only does the Havdalah, the ritual service that we recite when the Sabbath comes to a conclusion, so how did it come to be that part of Isaiah and another part is from where? From the book of, we're going to recite it next week, because next week is what? Purim. And there's a passage, Laihudim hoisa oir v'simcha v'sasim vikar. And we repeat that together. So not only does the person who's fulfilling the commandment of performing the Havdalah, we repeat it over. Where does that come from? That's from the book of Esther, chapter 8, verse 16. Whoa, why? How did they fit together? Let's go a little deeper. Let's go a little higher. This is going to be very interesting. Shabbos. So we have an element of Shabbos, a dynamic of Shabbos that people often overlook. A fundamental question needs to be asked. I remember being interviewed on a show a few years ago where the person was not a big fan of Judaism, and he asked, what's the deal with your Sabbath? Like, God rested? Like, your God, he rested? Did he need a vacation? It's a good question, really. Like, why did God rest? We rest. We need a vacation. Sometimes I'm writing a lot, and sometimes I have to just put down the writing, whatever I'm writing, and just go out and just take a walk and clear my head. I really do need to stop from what I'm doing just to return. But that's not possible with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Did he need it? Moreover, there's a second question here. And that is, if we could figure out some reason, if we can assign some reason why God would rest on the seventh day, we'll just concede that there's some explanation for that. Why do we celebrate that? Why do we celebrate a day that God didn't accomplish a thing? logically, we should be celebrating the 6 days of creation. Day 1, Sunday, Hashem created light. What a fantastic thing. What a wonderful holiday that would make. We could sit and talk about the importance of light. Imagine what we know today. Imagine what we're aware of Einstein's theories about light and time, and they're intimately connected. In the ancient world, no one understood why God had to, in a sense, create light first. We now know without light, time would have been impossible. The sun could wait for day 4. Maybe we'll celebrate day 4. We'll celebrate the day God created fish. No, we don't celebrate any of those things. We celebrate the very day that God created absolutely nothing. Let's try to assemble that and figure out what's happening there, what's going on there. So as God is creating on each and every day, in essence, he's hiding himself behind creation. With everything that he creates, he's hiding. He creates another letter. But if God would have kept creating beyond the 6th day, that means continue hiding himself. If somehow God continued to work into the 7th day, that means he was working on Shabbos. That means Friday bled into Saturday. If that would have happened, he would have been too hidden. We would not be able to find him. It's intriguing that there are so many people who believe in God because they see the wonder of the Almighty in creation. If you've been in a delivery room, you know what I'm talking about. There are many people who study the sciences. They're marveled by it. And therefore they come to know God because of creation. Conversely, there are people who are scientists, like I'm thinking of Stephen Hawking, who said, no, I study physics, and because of what I know about science, you don't need a God. You could explain everything through physics. And many, many atheists, who are the most radical atheists, are scientists. And they're using creation to prove there is no God. And they failed. Hopefully they'll do tshuva. The key is that when Shabbos begins, the person who could say, I found you, Hashem, that's the person who's a success. That's why Shabbos is so important, because if you deny Shabbos, you're denying God. Shabbos means I found you, I recognize you. You are the source. You were hidden behind your creation, but I succeeded in discovering when I found you. That's why Shabbos is so critical, because if you deny Shabbos, that means you're denying the Creator. That means you failed at discovering God through the mess of creation. But it can't go into the 7th day. The 7th day is the place where now it's kulay menucha, it's only with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So there's this hiddenness. And of course, the book of Esther. A sefer that begins with a traumatic event, really a grievous sin of the Jewish people. How does the book of Esther begin? What did the Jews do wrong? Think it through. What did they do wrong? As the book of Esther begins, as we're sitting there listening to it, right? We're all going to be in synagogue this week, and we're going to have the book of Esther in front of us as the person is reading it out loud, right? And as soon as it starts, I don't know about you, actually I'm pretty sure about you, that we all feel that same way when it starts. We go, oh, this is not going to turn out well. This is going really bad. You know, it's one of those visceral sfarim that just, so what's really, as the book of Esther begins, and we're recalling what occurred during the Persian Empire, this is not going well. Please tell me what is not going well. Could you say, what's that, Tatala? Just speak loud English.
We're enjoying getting pleasure from the Suda of Hashverosh.
Achashverosh, a Persian king, made a Suda, a big birthday party. Went on for a very long time. And the Jews decided this is the Persian king who was holding on to the kalim of the temple that had been destroyed. And the Jews decided they were going to show up. Not any Jews, but they showed up. And where was it? It was in Shushan, which is Susa. It's in Iran, modern day Iran. In Persia. Okay. City's still there. That's not a good thing, right? This is trouble. The Jews are, and I think we read it as the Jews are rubbing elbows with Malchus, with powerful people, and this doesn't come as a surprise to us that Jews might be compromising themselves for the sake of getting close to someone they really shouldn't be close to, who's a very big Russia. I would like to suggest there was something that makes this 100 times worse than it appears. Could you make the story more outrageous? Okay, so it's the history. What was happening at the exact same time? Because people don't get this little piece. The Mechaber of the book of Esther just assumed that you knew what was going on at the same time. Okay, little history. In the year 3390 after creation, Cyrus, the king of Persia, who essentially defeats the Babylonian Empire, tells the Jews, I have a nevuah. It doesn't say from who, but it's from Isaiah, that from God, Jews go back to Eretz Yisrael, go back to Jerusalem, rebuild it, build the Beis HaMikdash. That's how the book of Ezra begins. Okay, Cyrus was not a tzaddik, and Isaiah tells us he didn't even know my name. Why does God use a guy like Cyrus? When I say a guy, I change that because you got very good guy. Why did God use a person who was almost certainly an idol worshiper, almost probably a Zoroastrian? Why would God use him? So that's amazing. But he says to the Jews, go back and build. As it turns out, 42,360 Jews, we know their families. They are itemized in Ezra chapter 2. We know them all. We know exactly who they are. They came, no nefesh b'nefesh, no Jewish agency, nothing. They came back to Eretz Yisrael on a promise. For 50 years, there wasn't a Jew in Eretz Yisrael. From the time of the destruction of the first temple, really from the time that Gedaliah ben Achikah was assassinated, so all the Jews were thrown out of Israel, and there was not a Jew for Nun Shana, for half a century, there was no Jews in Eretz Yisrael, none. Really, since Yeshua ben Nun, that's the only tekufa, it's the only period that the Mamash was not a Jew to be found in the Holy Land. So what happens is the Jews go to Eretz Yisrael and start building the Beis HaMikdash. Read Ezra chapter 3. They start laying the foundation stone. They're building a Mizbeach. The second Beis HaMikdash is being built. But what happens very quickly? We have a great president that we love who's very pro-Israel, and suddenly he's voted out. Suddenly he's removed. And the whole Beis HaMikdash project is stalled. You just should know it's going to be stalled for 15 years. So here you had a big problem, which will go on in the book of Ezra, is the second temple now is under construction. The project is halted. Nehemiah is going to go, really, his whole life is going to be devoted to making sure that Yerushalayim is built. So imagine you're a Jew 2,500 years ago, and you can go east or you can go west, meaning you can go to Jerusalem and participate in undoing this damage and having the temple built. This is during the time of Ahasuerus, or you can go east to Persia and cozy up with the king. What the Jews did at that time was so gefährlich. It's not just where they went, but it's where they didn't go. I don't want to get complicated with you, but the Gemara says if the Jews had all come to Eretz Yisrael at that time, Mashiach would have come. And in fact, that's why we needed Nevi'im at that time, because you need a Navi to build a Beis HaMikdash. Could have happened. I don't want to go too far. What happens? So that's a nightmare. Suddenly an anti-Semite emerges after a king executes his wife for not behaving the way he thought. Well, that happened. I can think of kings who triggered the Church of England, who had his wives executed. He wouldn't be the first king or the last king to execute his wife. All right, stuff happens, right? And then the Jews are in a lot of trouble. Mordechai approaches Esther and says, look, God's going to save these people, and you could be the one to be the tool that God will use. And if you don't, someone else will. As it turns out, Esther, I'm sure, was a very, very beautiful girl. She was mamish very beautiful, and it turns out Ahasuerus took a liking to her. He would not be the first non-Jew to take a liking to a very pretty Jewish girl. Okay, that could be a coincidence. You know where I'm going with this. It's not an accident that the book of Esther stands alone in Tanakh is the only book where God's name is not mentioned explicitly. And then there's a whole series of random events. Mordechai is a member of the Great Assembly. He was a great rabbi. He had to be a polylinguist. He knew many languages. He was in the perfect place overhearing an assassination plot in a language which no one thought he would understand, and he informs it. And did you ever have trouble falling asleep at night? Laying there in bed with your face against the pillow and the pillow gets too hot? So we have to turn the pillow on the other side where there's some refrigeration system going on where that's always nice and cool. You ever have insomnia? So Achashverosh had insomnia. What I am conveying is fairly transparent. Every event in the delivery of the children of Israel could have been ascribed to coincidence, good fortune. We got really unlucky with Haman, and then we got really lucky with Mordechai and Esther. It's all luck. There's no God. You could have denied God altogether. But the Jewish people said, we found God. We see him in it. And we see that our suffering is not from just we got the wrong president who was elected in this country and the UN went in this way and the president of Brazil went down instead of going up. And this is all the hand of God. And they realized it and they fasted and they recognized it. Not like Mount Sinai where there was a mountain held over their head. No, they mamish could have said, they could have denied it and said, this was just bad fortune and let's try to reverse it. And I don't know, bribe Haman and pay off this one and do, no. They understood through it all that this is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And they fasted and the Almighty, blessed be his holy name, delivered them in a marvelous way to the point that Purim is considered a day in a way that's even holier than Yom Kippur. Moreover, Chazal, our sages of blessed memory, tell us that in the days of Mashiach, when Mashiach comes, it'll be very soon, are people going to be studying Yeshayahu? Not really. Why would we be studying Yeshayahu after Mashiach comes? Are we going to be studying Yirmiyahu? It's got a holy book. It's not that it's not holy. Just what Jews are going to be studying when Mashiach comes. Of course, the 5 books of Moses, the Torah. We have to know how to live our lives. And the book of Esther, because that's how it comes. That's how the delivery comes. That's why Esther is the Purim is this remarkable event in history where God, it's hidden. It's nothing like Hezekiah. And then we find, and this is why the tradition of wearing a mask, an outfit dressing up on Purim is really from this, because God came in a costume. He dressed up like the characters that we encounter in the book of Esther, and that's how God came. He came dressed up as somebody else. And we could have bought into the characters, gripping characters. We didn't. We said, I see you, Hashem, you're there. And that's Mashiach. When Mashiach comes, everyone sees the truth. And now you understand Pshat in the first pasuk of Isaiah chapter 12. Bayoimahu, on that day, Oidcha Hashem ki onafto bi. I praise you, Hashem, for being angry at me. Now you understand Pshat. What do you mean I'm praising God for angry? Now I understand that in the tsaros, in the misery, in the Kishinev pogrom, now it's all clear to me. That's what's going on. This is what we're going to say. Everything has become clear. Today, many things are clear. But there are some mysteries we don't know, we don't understand. When Mashiach comes, the knowledge of God will cover the world as the water covers the sea. That's why water is going to come up in this chapter, as it does, of course, in Havdalah. The water represents the salvation and the deliverance. We're going to say, Baruch Hashem, that you were angry at me. You saved me. That was the only way I could have been saved. Meaning, it causes Jewish people to recognize, you must know this is all the end of Hashem. People very, very comfortable. Not in France, they're nervous. But in Orlando, wake up. Everything that's happening, it's really from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Don't be a fool and go, oh, this anti-Semitic group that shouts all these filthy things at the Jews, they go, oh, that's just, we have an anti-Semite problem. No. We have a problem with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Our behavior is such, Hashem is waking us up. It's very important to see every event, all the events that are happening here at Israel now, is a wake-up call, it's an alarm. Bayoimahu oidecha Hashem ki onafta bi. Thank you, Hashem, that you were angry at me. Yoshev Apcha Usinachmeni. The Targum Yonason says, despite the anger, you still delivered us. I was on air today, this Sunday, I was interviewed. Someone asked me about free will in the Messianic age. Are we all going to be robots in the Messianic age? No. Why will rebellion come to an end in the Messianic age? It's not like on your computer when you press the key for a K, the K goes up on your screen because the computer has no free will. It's more like when you're in the kitchen cooking, sure, right? And you burn yourself, you cut yourself when using a knife, and you go, "Oy, you anger yourself. What an idiot! I wasn't paying attention." You would never stick your hand in the boiling water because it's so obvious what the consequences are, but people do make mistakes. In the Messianic age, just everything is going to be golui, everything is going to be open, the whole world will understand. Behold, God is my salvation. I will trust and have no fear. Hashem is my praise. He was always my salvation for me. The words in Lashon Kodesh, Ki ozi v'zimras ya Adonai vayhi li lishua. Those are very familiar words. Is it only because of Havdalah that those are familiar words? Why might those also be very familiar words? Right, that's the Oz Yashir, that's a song of Moses. It's a song of Moses, Exodus chapter 15, verse 2. So this is Isaiah 12:2, but there's a slight difference between the two. Could you detect the difference between Exodus chapter 15, verse 2, the Oz Yashir, and Isaiah? I'll repeat the words as they appear in Isaiah. So, Ki Ozi v'zimras ka, because God is my strength, Hashem, Yud Kei Vav Kei, Vahi li Yeshua, and He's my salvation. How does that differ from the Oz Yashir? Right. Yud Kei Vav Kei is here. In the Shir of Moshe Rabbeinu in Exodus chapter 15, you don't have the Yud Kei Vav Kei, you just have Ka. What's the nafkamina between Ka? Like, what does that name mean? What is Ka? So it comes up quite a number of times in Tanakh. What does Ka always mean? So what does Yud Kei Vav Kei mean? And that tells you why we never allowed to say it. Yud Kei Vav Kei conveys that God was, is, and will be. He's eternal. We can't see all of it. What does Kav mean? Kav means it's the first part. It's the Yud and the Hey. Meaning, I see now, like imagine living at the time in the year 2448 after creation. You're observing the Exodus, right? And you are thanking God, but do you see the whole picture? No. It's for that reason, my brothers and sisters, that Isaiah chapter 12 is the Haftarah for either Shmini Shal Pesach, the 8th day of Passover, if you're in Chutz La'aretz, if you're outside the land of Israel. Why do they include it? Because it's Mashiach. What does Mashiach have to do with Pesach? You know the answer, because Pesach is not the full delivery, it's a partial delivery. And there are many Hasidim that have a Sudas Mashiach on that final day, because we ultimately understand that the Exodus is not the end of the story, it's part of it. So at that time, Moses can only see Ka. When Moses asks Hashem, can I see your face? And Hashem says, no. What does he ask for? I want to see your nose? No, I want to see the future. That you can do. You can see my back. I'm always there with you. In Mashiach, is everything going to be amplekt in Yiddish? Great word. Is everything going to be open and exposed? Yes. So in the Oz Yashir, it's only Ka. But when Mashiach comes, then we see the whole picture from beginning to end. This is how HaKadosh Baruch Hu interacts with our people. There are many times when we see Hashem. I remember when I was a little boy, so I had trouble falling asleep at night. But the one thing that would comfort me was as I was laying in bed and it was dark and I thought there was a monster hiding in my closet, as many young kids do, and I'm laying there but when I heard my parents making noise in the kitchen, whatever they were doing, making a pot, I felt calm. My parents are there. But when Mashiach comes, we must see everything. Everything becomes exposed. We see it all, and we see that really all the difficulties and the challenges we went through, we understand it now. And now it's not just a Havdalah anymore, it's everything is Shabbos. That's what Mashiach is. When Mashiach comes, so then everything is Shabbos, everything is Menucha, everything is open, everything is done. Then we can see it all, because then we have the Yud Kei Vav Kei, not just the Kod. That's what the difference here. This is what Yeshayahu HaNavi, HaKodesh VaHaTorah, is a holy man. He includes this, understand that when Mashiach comes, everything is going to be visible, even what Moshe Rabbeinu wasn't able to see during his time. Now we understand a little bit more about Purim. We understand the mistake that was made. The mistake that was made was monumental. We think it was just selling out in order to be in an important place. Yes, but it was noch erga. It was much worse. They had a job to do in Eretz Yisrael, and they ignored Eretz Yisrael in favor of the White House. They rather be with the president in Washington rather than Eretz Yisrael building a Beis Hamikdash and fighting together with Ezra and Nehemiah to build up Eretz Yisrael again. That was a monumental failure of Klal Yisrael. Ushavte mayim b'sosoin, then water will be drawn with great joy, with the waters, the true waters of salvation. My beautiful brothers and sisters, as I explained to you, this is why in the previous chapter, Isaiah 11, verse 9, in the Sefer Habakkuk, chapter 2, verse 14, it's the water represents Torah, the knowledge of Hashem. It's always the knowledge of Hashem. That's the key Messianic prophecy. The key of everything Mashiach is that everyone will know the truth. Hashem will be king of the whole world, the Goyim, the Jews. It's the delivery of the world. Everything else is attached to that. Mayan is so important, in fact, Yechezkel, the end of the book of Ezekiel. Ezekiel lived during the destruction of the first temple and during the Babylonian exile. Yechezkel, the whole end of Yechezkel, is all Mashiach. The whole end of Yechezkel, the whole last segment, and he describes in chapter 47, the second to last chapter of his holy work, the fresh waters that emerge from Yerushalayim are going to pour in to the Dead Sea, to Yam HaMelech, and it's going to become fresh water, and it's going to be filled with fish, and life is going to be restored. Not only Klal Yisrael, but in fact the whole world will be restored, and may we see that Gula and the full redemption quickly in our time.
אשר מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא ואת נעשה בחפצו